Arguably, we did not have a lot of feedback from LucasArts during this time. I think we possibly had 6 comments overall on our storyline, which was amazing. I think we had 2 art comments thrown in those 6, actually. And actually, the wonderful thing about that is I think that they were so inundated with all the work they were doing on episode 3 at the time that they just did not have the chance to review all the stuff we did. Although I like to think that it was so great and the ideas were so neat, they were like, wow, you guys just go. So, but who knows?
You work on RPGs, which are obviously very heavily story-based, but do you have to cater to players that just want to skip those cinematics, and how do you direct those players?
So this goes back to courtesy to the players. We try and approach all the role-playing games we do, that we do now. Back in the early days of Black Owl Studios, we were not very responsible with doing this, and Planescape Torment was probably one example of this. You should always give the player the chance to fast forward, skip, or exit a conversation early, and yet still have them be able to have access to the information they need to complete that quest. Not doing that, I think, does a disservice to the players. There are a certain, there is a sizable percentage of role-playing game players that actually just want to go out and dungeon crawl, and you should absolutely make sure that in the context of the story and narrative, you allow them to do that without imposing the storyline on the player. If you include like movies they can't skip or animated sequences they have to watch, especially if it's a multiplayer game, you're just going to piss them off. In Alpha Protocol, what we try to do is make sure that for every conversation you have with a contact or someone you're dealing with, we always try and include an action option that allows action players to get just right to the point, whether they need to shoot a suspect in the knee and then have them blather all the information you need into your journal, or you can smash shot glasses on their head, or hang up on phone calls and go, I don't want to fucking talk to that guy anyway. We just try to make sure that when we do designs for that, people can escape the conversation at any time because they shouldn't have to be subjected to it.
Sorry, Trent was going to ask you a question, but we're kind of pressed for time.
Oh.
So if it's all right, I'm going to say something to the end, but we're heading in the same direction as the first player. Yeah, attack them.
All right, so the next title I want to deal with is a title I worked on, Planescape Torment, back at Black Owl Studios. This title was sort of an unusual role-playing game and a very unusual license for Black Owl Studios to take. And a lot of the elements that ended up being in that title came out of my frustration and hatred for other role-playing games. To give a really quick summary, Planescape Torment was a multi-dimensional fantasy world. What TSR and Dungeons & Dragons did was they created this multiverse where all of their campaign worlds were interlinked, and then they also allowed you to travel to other planes too, like heaven and hell, and other fantasy worlds as well. So it was a very all-inclusive campaign world where just about anything was possible, which was awesome. Another kind of cool element about the franchise, which I greatly respected, and there was no hatred here whatsoever, Torment, the Planescape universe that Torment took place in, nobody was fighting over countries or states or powers or loot. What they were all fighting over was the faith and belief of every living thing that existed across the planes. Because the way the universe was set up, the more people believed in a certain aspect or a certain philosophy, the more strength that philosophy gained, and that could actually change the shape of the planes, provided people simply believed in that concept enough. And that was just fascinating. And all of those faith and belief changes could cause actual physical changes in the environment too. So the whole contest between heaven and hell took on very real dimensions and was much more about conversion and getting people to see things their way. So Planescape was also odd in that as a campaign setting that was supposed to cater to the Dungeons & Dragons game system, it ended up breaking a lot of its own rules in order to sort of make cool environments and cool events take place within it. And ultimately, it was a perfect campaign setting for a guy who was burned out on RPGs like I was. So among the things that I was very, very sick of in role-playing games, the first one was death. Death in role-playing games only meant to me that I had to go back to the load screen and reload, or I would stop playing. So the first concept we examined in Torment was, you know what? Death is not only going to be something that you can easily escape from, but also it's going to be something you can use as a tool in your environment. And what I mean by that is that the main character in Torment is immortal, so he never dies. What happens is, however, is whenever he does die, he sort of gains amnesia, and during that amnesia period, various other things can happen, like he can get hauled off to the mortuary, or he can escape certain death traps or other situations. So what we tried to do was make sure that death was only a temporary movie load away before you resumed your quest. And sometimes when you would die in the game, the fact that you were lying dead on the street or lying dead in a dungeon meant that sometimes people would actually take you different places, or certain traps and environments would actually deactivate, now realizing that you had been killed. So you could actually use your own death as a tool to get past various obstacles or find your way to new locations in the game. I was very, very sick of swords. I probably do not share that conception with most with most role players out there today. There are probably 3 swords in the entire world of Torment in the game. Also, Torment, you ended up getting a lot more experience points and a lot more power for your character out of actually talking to other people, completing quests, and remembering things that you had lost while in your amnesiac state. And that was a little different because most role-playing games awarded you experience points solely for going out and murdering the most monsters you could find. One other concept that was a source of frustration to me that we wanted to sort of turn on its head with Torment was a lot of games, a lot of role-playing games, when you start the game, you are asked to make a series of choices about your character without ever having interacted with the game world at all. Like, you have to choose things like, hey, well, I'm a good guy, I'm a bad guy, I'm a pretty just guy, I treat people fairly. I used to be a farmer, I worked for this particular nation, it's besieged by another nation. All of these things you would have to decide for your character before you actually went out into the world and actually got to see what that world was like. So what we tried to do with Torment was we had it set up so you would actually decide exactly who you are, and even down to what your name was. And you would not actually discover who you were until you were actually at the very, very end of the game rather than the beginning. I was also very, very sick of, halflings and dwarves and elves. Again, I was probably alone in the RPG game market for that belief. I have always felt that halflings are this really shitty layover from Lord of the Rings, and that's the only reason that they're even in Dungeons and Dragons. I don't even understand why gnomes were in Dungeons & Dragons in the first place. All these particular races had so much story and narrative baggage attached to them that I just wanted to be in a campaign fantasy setting where none of those particular races were present. To be fair to the license, these races actually did exist in the Planescape universe. We just never showcased them at all in Torment. And there weren't really any complaints about that I recall, but maybe that everyone was just being so quiet about it. I was also very, very sick of predictable encounters. My 2 best examples for one of the worst encounters in role-playing games are killing rats in sewers and also confronting hordes of undead. I'll start with the rats example. A number of role-playing games around that time had you start out by going down to the sewers and killing a bunch of rats for somebody to sort of build up your experience level and be a sort of an easy tutorial area. I was very, very sick of that cliche, and Planescape was actually very accommodating with that because the rats in the Planescape universe are one of the most dangerous creatures you can encounter. They have these things called cranium rats, which one-on-one aren't too bad. They're just like rats. But when 5 of them get together, or 10,